The summer transfer window is gaining some momentum. So here to help us cut through the noise of what's happening next is David Ornstein. And here to break down if those latest rumours actually make sense is JJ Bull and Art de Roche. Welcome to the Deal Sheet. Okay, let's start with something that I think, well, we're going to find out, David, is in its infancy. As reported in the What We're Hearing section of the Deal Sheet, is Eberechi Eze apparently has some interest from Arsenal. So I'm going to ask you now, what is this? What stage is it at? Am I allowed to be excited at all?
Well, you can be excited about anything, Joe. Should Arsenal fans be? Let's see, because Eberechi Eze is a good market opportunity, you could say, given the way he ended last season, given his qualities, given the fact that there is a release clause in his contract at Crystal Palace in excess of £60 million. I'm sure many have looked at the situation before. For whatever reason, they've not gone for it. And Arsenal are exploring it as things stand. So they've held some conversations, not club to club so far. So it's more with the sort of player side of things. And it would be as a potential attacking addition as they weigh up several different possibilities, such as backup for Bukayo Saka on the right side, a potential left wing addition, and number 9, of course, which we've talked so much about. And then maybe even an 8/10, and that's where Eze comes into the situation. He's high among their candidates. He's a serious consideration. And it's not like they would be looking at him and not a left winger or not a striker. It's like an additional thing. And that, I think, has maybe made the fan base quite intrigued by this possibility. But we're not saying it's going to happen. We're not saying it's advanced. And Arsenal, I think, for a player who's only got a couple of years left on his contract, is 27 years old now, wouldn't want to be going as high as the release clause. They would want to go lower if indeed they proceed with this. And I'm sure Crystal Palace would like to see the release clause met if they're going to lose their player.
That's generally what a release clause is for.
Yeah, although it's timed with Eze, so it has to be hit within a certain period. Otherwise, it's not active and you just have to negotiate like normal. I don't know exactly what those timings are.
Right.
But there are many factors for Crystal Palace to consider in such a situation. Can we ever get that sort of price for him from anywhere? Yeah. Is he going to sign a new contract? Are we going to lose him for a lower figure subsequently? Can we sell a different player to make income less relevant? If not, do we need to think about this very seriously? What about the wishes of the player? Would he like to go? I'm sure it's an opportunity he might be open to exploring, given he actually started at Arsenal as a youngster and was released from their youth system. And it would present, Champions League football and that sort of thing. But we're not at that point yet. I'm just kind of laying the foundations for something that may develop, but in a relatively embryonic stage, as I understand it right now.
Okay, it's embryonic, Art, but I think you're intrigued by it, aren't you?
Yeah, I think everyone is, to be fair. When you look at a lot of things with Eze, it just makes a lot of sense. As David mentioned, he was at the club's academy from, I think it was 8 years old until he was released at 13. So for me, I'm just 9 days older than him, so it's quite easy to do the maths. But that's between 2006 and 2011.
Yeah.
And when you look at, I guess, the players that were in Arsenal's first team at that time, and the players who would have been, I guess, role models for any Arsenal fan growing up, or player, it would have been Cesc Fabregas, Thomas Rosicky, Alexander Hleb, Andre Arshavin. These are guys who Arsene Wenger at the time brought in as attacking midfielders, but would also play out wide because they were so good technically that they could just function wherever. And I think that's something that would apply with Eze as well. I think when you look at the recruitment of midfielders, in particular in the last couple of years, you have Declan Rice, Mikel Merino, and I'm going to include Kai Havertz as a midfielder as well.
Fair enough.
All very tall, all very physically dominating, but not as technical as players who those watching Arsenal were used to at one time. And I think Eze just brings back that feeling that a lot of people have been craving in recent seasons, and that's why the intrigue is so strong.
I mean, JJ, we've heard he can obviously play in a couple of different positions. Where do you see him in this Arsenal team? Were it to happen, a reminder that it's embryonic, that's what David said.
Yes, so we know that Eze at Crystal Palace tends to play in the left like a 3-4-3, so he tends to be in these sort of positions here. But what you want to do with Eze, I think, is get him around a striker, somewhere in these positions here. Now, the most obvious place he would play in this Arsenal team is on the left wing if you take Martinelli out. What Martinelli's really good at is running into space, especially when they're playing on the counter. But what he's maybe not the best at, and what Arsenal struggle with, is when they're playing against a team who sits back in the block, and so they have to defend against them. So you take Martinelli out, put Eze there. Even though you want him to be in these positions, you can still start him in these wide areas because you play different positions in different parts of build-up. So say you get into these positions here during build-up, that's fine. But when you get to the final third, what you want is probably someone. Well, you need someone to overlap, essentially. So when we look at like just a random goal that he scores for Crystal Palace, so here is Eze in the middle and all the space. The reason he's got all this space is because Tarek Mitchell, who's the wing back, has allowed them to stretch it. You see there's a lot of difference between the right back and the centre back here, and they're playing against Fulham. So because Mitchell is wide, it means that Eze has the space to move into and he can receive the ball. Lovely little trick, like what Art's talking about. Very tricky technical player, goes past and then pings one in from about 20 yards into the back of the net, which is
Not
what you're supposed
bad,
to do.
hey?
That's what you're meant to do in football, Joe. Put the ball in the net.
That's what I never understood. It's why my career didn't work out.
That's one of many reasons, yes. And so Arsenal tend to play, as we know, with Lewis Skelly as an interior midfielder, really, not a left back, because positions don't mean anything these days. And so if you took Lewis Skelly out, you could put someone in like Calafiore, who would then be able to overlap, and that would maybe give you the space you need to play him inside. But regardless, I think it still makes sense because of what he brings to the team. When you get into these final third positions, he's going to do things here. But this is where you start to see a bit of a problem, because he's going to play in this position here where Rice would normally move into. And then Odegaard will be around a bit here, and you've got maybe White pushes up. This is what we see from Arsenal a lot of the time. So you do kind of need this outside player, I think, which is something they used to have in the past, but they don't really have now. Do you think Calafiore would be doing that for Arsenal?
Yeah, he's someone who can go into those more infield kind of areas, but he's very athletic as well. So I think one thing that made him really exciting last season was when he was bombing down the left, overlapping. And I think for Arsenal, that's something they've missed. Kieran Tierney used to do that for them. And was very good at it. And at the time, it actually allowed Emile Smith-Rowe to do what we're talking about in terms of what Eze could do. And it really helped Arsenal at a time where they were struggling for creativity. So that's something that I think could be quite encouraging if they were to kind of advance their interest in Eze. And I've got an example that I'll show you guys afterwards. But you can just see it allows them to have a bit more of a presence inside the pitch when teams might try and clog that area up. Something they've struggled to really deal with in recent seasons. They can cut through that with one or two passes, really, whereas having that, I guess, option out wide just also keeps the opposition guessing. So I think Arteta, for how much he's made Arsenal competitive in recent seasons, I think there is also a need to be, I guess, different and have variation to your game as well.
No, it will certainly be exciting to see.
Well, speaking of things that might change, so it looks like Arsenal might not change too much from what we've seen in the last few seasons, but a lot of teams, I think, are going to end up playing with really advanced fullbacks this season, like touchline fullbacks. There seems to be the trend, if you want to call it that. But the way you do that is probably you want to move a player, maybe the defensive midfielder, into a position where you create more of a three to cover more of the space in these situations. Zubimendi could then dictate play from really deep with a bit of space, because you can't put someone marking him there.
I'm going to ask you about him next, by the way.
Okay.
Yeah.
But also, rather than playing through the middle, they could go out to the left-hand side, which is quite a common thing you've seen over the last few decades, like Toni Kroos did for Real Madrid, for example. So there's another way to create a three. So you've got a player in space deep. Granted, Xhaka does this a lot, actually. So then you can push players further up, which means you get more fun from Eze and allows Rice to still block, crash and do these sorts of things. So we might see a little bit of variation from Arteta this season, so it's not always the same as it has been. I'm not sure this is actually what they'll do, but it's what other people are doing, and good managers tend to draw from other good managers.
A note to caution, and maybe Arsenal fans don't like to hear that when something's too good to be true. It normally is. The age profile will be a consideration for the Arsenal hierarchy normally, and we're seeing this increasingly with clubs, and I'm sure it's a view of the Arsenal ownership as well. We'll go for younger players with higher value, potential resale. For Eze, you'd be going for win now. You know, somebody who can deliver. You're not going to see that money back. You want sporting success as a result of such an investment. But, you know, among the strikers that Arsenal are looking at, which is their priority position, you've got Victor Gyökeres, Ollie Watkins in the mix, Sesko's of the younger bracket. And so if they do go for one of the older options in attack, in the number 9 role, also bringing in, say, an 8-10 of that age profile, it is a thrilling prospect for the Arsenal fans that want them challenge for trophies next season. But it will be a factor in any kind of decision. Also, and how far they're willing to push financially. And within this conversation does somebody need to depart? When I reported this, I said that part is unclear at the minute.
Right.
Is there going to be an exit? And there's been a lot of chatter around a Martinelli, a Trossard, maybe some of the others in there. That's something we just don't know yet, and it's worth being mindful of as supporters see the coverage around that topic.
Okay, well, something else that's still a bit unclear to me. Martin Zubimendi. What's happening there?
He's going to be announced at some point very soon.
Imminently. Could it have happened by the time this releases?
That is plausible.
Okay.
Because I think I reported, say, a week ago with our colleague James McNicholas that Zubimendi had been in London to meet Arsenal officials as part of the process of finalising and completing his move to Arsenal. Mm-hmm. That has been regarded as done and signed by Arsenal for some weeks, maybe even months. Arsenal have been factoring him into their, Mikel Arteta's, plans for the new season. What are Arsenal going to do in terms of Zubimendi, Rice, Norgaard is incoming from Brentford, Marino. There's a lot of possibilities in there, and I think Arsenal are pretty pleased with how their new central midfield is going to be shaping up.
Well, just before we talk about how it might be shaping up, Norgaard, to me at least, seemed to kind of come out of nowhere. What about to you? Were you expecting that one?
So it was a surprise to me, yep. No problem with that, but I didn't break that one. But when you look at the situation, think about it, his profile, 31 years old, Premier League ready, already in London as well. Yeah. He's the Brentford captain, Denmark international. He's got a pretty consistent record of appearances, not terribly troubled by injuries. He contributes goals as well.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it does. And I think Arsenal will be pretty satisfied at getting him.
Well, we've alluded to it already, but what do you think it's going to look like in the midfield area? A lot of new faces.
It'll look like this.
Right.
It'll look exactly the same as always. Norgaard can replace Zubimendi when he's not there. They obviously have a lot of games to play, so you need a bit of cover. There is a world in which he could play alongside him, because Zubimendi is a very creative player and could then feasibly push up a little bit if you don't have Rice available or Odegaard or something like that. Obviously, you can't play 12 players at once. Sure. The joke I always make, which isn't funny anymore. But if you look at some numbers for Norgaard, what we'll see is that Christian Norgaard makes a lot of tackles and interceptions for Brentford.
Wow.
In fact, did you know?
He made one really big one in the middle there.
That was the biggest interception of all.
Wow.
Interception of our hearts.
Since
he joined...
He laughed at my joke. Yeah.
I need some new jokes, as we have established. Since he joined the Premier League, he was promoted in, I think it was 2021. No player has made more interceptions than Norgaard in the entire of the Premier League.
Right.
Did you know that?
I
didn't know that, but now...
I made a video about it, so you've been watching my videos. Yeah. Also, he's made a lot of tackles. I think it's like 3 or 2 players are made more than him at that same time. Right. Sounds like a very defensive player, but Brentford sit a lot deeper. So he's got lots of interceptions here, defensive actions here. Comparing him to Jorginho much fewer. He's not as mobile. Jorginho is more of a lovely passing type player. Norgaard's a bit more defensive. Doesn't mean he can't do that, because he plays a lot of through balls. You go through any games you watch him play, he snaps onto the ball, passes it forward, he moves things forward. He's not just he plays for Brentford and he's not really famous, doesn't mean he doesn't do much. Yeah. So I think this is the thing to remember. But Zubimendi's also a very defensively active player too. So I think it's just good cover to have. I like it personally. I think it's a really smart little transfer.
It's exciting, isn't it? What do you think, Art?
Yeah, I think with Norgaard, it just makes a lot of sense. When you look at Arsenal last season, they were hit with a lot of injuries. And when you're going into the new season, especially with the Champions League as well, you'd want someone like a Norgaard rather than having to rely on someone you don't really trust. And I think when you speak about, I guess, Jorginho, I think it helps that he has probably more physical capacity, as you mentioned, JJ. So yeah, with that one, I think it makes a lot of sense. I wouldn't say like I was over the moon excited, but I was just like, yeah, that makes sense. So I'm cool with it.
Poor Christian Norgaard, you're not over the moon. Yeah.
And we talked earlier about whether there were other options. The one that Arsenal's sort of in-house recruitment team had been working on for some time prior to Andrea Berta's arrival as sporting director was the young player from Rosenborg, who's ended up going to Manchester City, Sverre Nipan. Right. So they were looking at somebody for the future who could be one of the next big things in football, in a way that Tottenham bought in a Bergvall a year ago, or a year and a half ago. Yeah. what Arsenal have ended up doing is going for experience, and we talked with the Eze possibility about a win now mentality. You know, they're also looking at a couple of options for the striker who are of an older age, as we touched upon before. They've brought in a goalkeeper in Kepa who is experienced and has won trophies, and they have a couple more positions that they're looking at. And I don't know, just say the left wing. Their options include, say, a Rodrigo from Real Madrid who's played at the top level and has won things. So this is bit by bit shaping up to be an Arsenal recruitment operation and team and squad that, yeah, it still contains plenty of youth and there's much to be optimistic about for the future. But Arteta, with what seems like growing external expectation and pressure, I don't think that same pressure is internal. The biggest pressure is probably what he puts on himself. But to win next season and to really convert those second place finishes into maybe a Premier League trophy or getting that step further in the Champions League after reaching the semi-finals, now is the time, and maybe that's being reflected in their business in the transfer market.
I mean, it's my personal opinion that they should try to win now. I think
That'd be helpful.
I think that would be good. Okay, well, that's Arsenal. Let's talk about Chelsea now, another team that featured prominently in the deal sheet. That's the Athletics deal sheet that you should read on a Tuesday. Jamie Gittins, Joao Pedro, just two of the names that I have written down in front of me. They're still doing business. It seems crazy to me. What's actually happening here?
They have been doing business for a long time, ever since the Clear Lake Todd Bowley takeover. It's been crazy, right?
It feels that way.
Shows no sign of abating. They moved quite quickly and decisively in this market. They had the Club World Cup to think about, which didn't just mean more football, but it meant more finance too.
Yeah.
And so straight away, Liam Delap, they beat Manchester United in that context, £30 million release clause. We talked about it a lot on this show and the aforementioned deal sheet. And you know, got him in as a number 9 option and then started looking at how else they could build out their attack, which was an area that Enzo Maresca was focusing on. And so Gittins was a player they attempted to sign before the Club World Cup. It didn't work out, but it wasn't like they parked it, kicked it into the long grass. Maybe we'll come back to it, maybe we won't. They worked on it immediately. And despite him ruling himself out of being able to play for Chelsea at the Club World Cup, because he featured for Dortmund, they got that deal done, and he will come from Dortmund as an attacking, exciting option in a position they were looking to fill on that left wing, where they'd also considered the likes of Garnacho and various other candidates.
Is that done now, do you think? Like, presumably the arrival of Gittins means Chelsea's interested in Garnacho, and Ekitike is another name I have here. Do you think that's maybe cool now, or?
I don't think it's that simple, binary, black and white, because players could leave, and so there may be holes that open up. They certainly wanted to post Sancho and Mudryk, reinforce there, and that's 2 gone and 1 in. Let's see what happens on the other side of the pitch with the Noni Madueke. Let's see what happens with the Christopher Nkunku. Let's see what happens with Nicholas Jackson. I don't think they're actively trying to shift Nicholas Jackson, but he is liked by a lot of clubs, and Chelsea are always open to conversations, and they consider trading. They've become a leading trader, a very busy club when it comes to the transfer market. So no, it doesn't mean it's closed for business. They're still being linked with Garnacho. Laurie Whitwell wrote about it on The Athletic. They're still being linked with Mohamed Kudus, who a number of reporters have pointed to. Yeah, there have been inquiries by Chelsea and conversations around Kudus and West Ham. So let's see if that develops. There are other clubs looking at him as well, and West Ham probably would prefer to keep hold of him. And then Joao Pedro comes to the fore. So he's a player that Chelsea have been considering for a long time. I think Newcastle made a stronger move in this window and tried to convince him to join. I think they would have been prepared to do a deal with Brighton, but his preference was always to join Chelsea, who came to the fore and struck a deal with Brighton. I think that's in excess of £50 million. Some are saying it ends up at around £60 million in terms of the whole package, 7-year contract, similar to Gittins, that sort of price bracket, that sort of contract length. And Joao Pedro, I heard Mark Carey on the Athletic FC podcast sort of pointing out that that's a profile that Chelsea were perhaps missing, and a lot of people like the signing of Joao Pedro, and I certainly think it's a canny old move. You mentioned Ekitike there. Most recent information suggests that the finances involved in that, from a transfer fee with Eintracht Frankfurt and a personal terms salary, are maybe a little bit high for what clubs like Chelsea are looking at. Liverpool have been linked with him too, but nobody seems to have made progress on Ekitike, and maybe it's for financial reasons. So yeah, let's see how the rest of the market pans out for Chelsea, weeks and months, because they have done a lot of proactive work that puts them in a strong position to be able to move bits in and out in the coming times, while knowing they've already strengthened their squad.
Well, just before I move on, you mentioned Madueke already. I know the Arsenal section is over, but it lives again, because you can never stop talking about Arsenal. There have been mootings. Tell me about these mootings.
Mootings, rumblings. Chelsea, as I just pointed out, are not averse to conversations about pretty much any player.
Yeah, they love to chat.
They love to chat. And Arsenal have long been looking for some backup to Bukayo Saka on the right-hand side, and how they could have done with it in his time out injured last season. Of course, they had Ethan Nwaneri there, who did very well initially, but didn't play much towards the end of the season. He's young, just 18 years old, and I think they see him more as a sort of 8-10 in the future. So who can deputise in that position? They looked into Brian Mbeumo initially. He's on course to join Manchester United. They've looked into Madueke as an option. I'm sure they have some other options. The advantage of Madueke is he has capabilities of playing on the other side as well if needed, whereas Mbeumo very much has been in the right channel. And I think some positive conversations have been held on that too, but more the player side, not club to club, between Arsenal and Chelsea at the time of recording. Things can obviously change. So there is something there. It's not to say it's going to happen, but here's a possible departure from Chelsea, and it's why they've been looking at these wide attacking positions in the market. So, yeah, watch this space.
Well, what do you make of the Madueke rumours, Art? If we're talking about Arsenal.
If we're talking about them. Excitement's not the word I'd use, especially when you look at the week of news. When you see the Eze news come out and then Madueke's name kind of joins with it. I don't think you have the same reaction across the board.
Sure.
And part of that is probably because of the Chelsea-Arsenal connection as well. Arsenal have signed Chelsea players for, I think, every season bar one since 2019.
Wow.
And not a lot of them have been hits.
How dare you disrespect Petr Cech?
Sorry. So yeah, that doesn't fill many people who watch Arsenal with a lot of encouragement. But I think you can see there is a player there. You see glimpses more often than consistent, I guess, performances, which would, I guess, help with what David spoke about in terms of having someone who could actually give Saka a rest, because I think David mentioned it would have been good to have that when Saka was injured, but I don't think Saka actually gets injured if you have that option in the first place. The one thing I would say is, in the back of my mind, more of an opinion than fact or anything, is I would like to see Arsenal maybe go a bit off track, actually scout a player, buy them when they're 19, 20 years old, like they did with Martinelli, and actually source a player themselves. Sure. I'd really like to see that at some point.
They did that with Saliba, I guess, right?
Yes. So that was from Saint Etienne. And I think that's something, obviously they've kind of gone away from because of the win now mentality. I think when you look at Arsenal as a club, historically they've been a club that take that chance on players, and I'd like to see them do that a bit more often. But I get the climate is very hot at the minute, so the pressure to bring in players who can kind of deliver straight away is there.
Okay, but back to Chelsea, JJ. I mean, they have a lot of players there, as you've illustrated.
That's not even all of them. I've just put the ones I think might be up for a first team place.
That's not even all of them.
Yeah.
It's quite exciting though, isn't it? And to David's point, every transfer window that goes by, I start to think, oh, maybe this is a good idea. I don't know, the team looks exciting.
Well, I remember I said it was a good idea back in the day. one of very few. I like it. It makes sense. A good example of it, I think, the transfer they brought in is like Mark Gue, who is available for about €6 million or something like that when they took him in. As soon as you sign him, he's instantly worth more. You could probably sell him for like 15, so you just make money off players like that straight away. It makes sense to me in a trading player model.
You're a trading guy.
I'm a trading player model guy.
Yeah.
Based off what I've seen from the Club World Cup so far and what I think might happen next season with how various managers are lining up, I think it might look something like this. I think you want to have flexibility and you want to have different players that can do different things, different situations. So Palmer, we know, has tended to play as part of a three, maybe through the middle. But at the moment and over the last few months, what we've seen is that Fernandes has basically become untouchable. He's like the second player on the team sheet after Caicedo. Because while Cole Palmer has been hugely influential, he's kind of really dropped off. So we look at his numbers. This is him from August to December last season. This is him afterwards. So the green is a goal, the blue is an assist, and then this is not as much, right? So a lot of his numbers, his underlying numbers, he also dropped down, chances created, all that sort of stuff. Touches even dropped a little bit. Whereas we look at Enzo Fernandez, who maybe doesn't seem quite as exciting a player. He's actually created the fourth most chances of any player in the Premier League last season. Really, really important. So I think you've got Enzo, or call him Enzo, it's easier to say, who will be there for most of it. But obviously Palmer can play in that position too. But in the Club World Cup, as I was trying to allude to, Palmer has been playing off to the left, especially in the last game that they played before we recorded. And so when you play this, you're thinking, oh, is he a winger now? No, it's because what Chelsea do, I mean, the positions, again, don't really matter. The formations are changing in every single phase of play. So Delap seems to be the starter at the moment. Jackson's got sent off for being an angry boy. But you put Palmer, if you play him here, you actually play him kind of like a split striker. And this is what a lot of teams are doing now. So you see this sort of thing here. Cucurella is the most attacking of attacking fullbacks at the moment. You see him, he's playing like a 9 half the time. So if you can get a situation where Palmer plays up here, you create your width from Cucurella being up here. But if Cucurella is deeper and Palmer's here, what he's done at Club World Cup is you drop deeper to receive the ball, which also then frees up a channel for Delap to run into or something like that, or Fernandes to move in behind. So that's one sort of thing. But then if you have Palmer, say he starts on the right and not Neto, because of course he did that in his youth, playing a left-footed right-sided player, then you put on someone like Gittins, who has gone over here. Suddenly you get a player who can overlap, take players on the side, and that creates space for players to run in behind. So if you're not playing Lavia, if you take him out, you've got Caicedo, then suddenly you can play Palmer in midfield with Fernandes like this, and then you've got these interior runs where they can run either side of a striker because you've got the width created by a player like that. And on the right-hand side, you could play someone like Neto or Madueke to widen the pitch.
Yeah.
But what Maresca seems to like doing is playing with a 3, and so if he has a 3-2 shape, is what I'm trying to say here. So you can get a 3-2 shape like this, you can get a 3-2 shape with a fullback going inside next to Caicedo. Lots of different options, different phases of play, different shapes, different players, meaning you can play different ways. But then Pedro is the interesting one because he is more of a withdrawn forward, I say like a second striker. So when you play him obviously alongside or behind someone like Delap or Jackson. So let's say Palmer starts on the right, just hypothetically for one game. He's not really playing on the right, he's going to play inside. So you probably play Gusto as the right back because then you get the overlaps. These all things have knock-on effects on positions. Pedro playing on the left-hand side would mean he is, again, a second striker, with a different profile to what Palmer would do. Palmer's good in tight spaces, so is Pedro. He's more of a link-up player. If you look at any of his numbers, what he's really good at doing is scoring penalties is one thing, but he's really good at linking the play, having players run beyond him, creating these sorts of maybe overload situations where you join in, tight combinations. He's also very, very aggressive off the ball. And so Chelsea, I think last season maybe lacked some of that. So now they've got Delap, who will chase you to your house after the game. You've got Pedro, who will do the same, like really hard-working, really aggressive players, and then Fernandes is pretty good at getting a tackle in as well. Caicedo is also one of the best in the entire league at winning the ball. So they're becoming a team that's going to be very tactically flexible, different options to achieve width and creativity different ways, but also you don't want to play against them because they can be nasty and they could be fun.
Okay, before we wrap up, just a couple of quick ones from me to you, David. The first is, I read that Ollie Watkins was of interest to Manchester United. What's happening there? Because it's gone a bit quiet now.
Me and Quick don't go hand in hand, but I'll try my best. Ollie Watkins, as reported by our colleague Laurie Whitwell, is among those on Manchester United's recruitment list I'd be surprised if he wasn't on recruitment lists of top clubs. He's such a good striker and a good lad. And they've maybe held some inquiries with his camp. I'm not sure if that's gone to Villa directly yet. As to conditions of a potential deal, as they weigh up options to strengthen in attack, there may be a departure for Rasmus Hojlund at some point, there may not. So these are all sort of spinning plates and balls being juggled in the air.
Okay.
And that's a situation that they're kind of attentive to. I think from my conversations with Villa, they see themselves as having no intention to part with Ollie Watkins. They want to continue with him up front for them. He's on the list of clubs like Arsenal, as they've been weighing up Sesko, Gyökeres and Watkins, who they went for in January. So Ollie Watkins is definitely an interesting case for the market because he's a Premier League proven England international, pretty guaranteed goal scorer. He is on a sort of older age than some of these younger players, obviously, but he has a great physical profile, a very strong record. He delivers, he's Premier League ready, and that's why he will naturally be of interest to clubs like Manchester United. It doesn't mean it's going to happen.
Yeah. Okay, well, one last one. You mentioned him already, Mohamed Kudus, West Ham. You mentioned him in relation to one or two other clubs. You said there was other interest. I have Spurs written down here. Tell me about that.
Yeah, they've got a reported interest in him. We don't know of it being more than he's one of the options they're considering at the moment. We spoke previously on The Athletic about how they inquired about Antoine Semenyo of Bournemouth, having also previously liked Brian Mbeumo. They still like him, but his direction of travel is Manchester United.
And Semenyo just signed a new
Semenyo signed his new contract, so
Yeah.
that one is off the agenda for... you'd imagine a season until the summer of 2026. And so, Kudus is in the orbit of clubs like Tottenham and I'm sure many others as well. West Ham, it's being suggested, might need to sell a player, and he's maybe their most obvious asset. They won't want to sell their best player. Their fan base sure won't. There's a release clause. It's different for different parts of the world, such as Premier League versus Saudi Arabia versus Europe, sliding scale of numbers. And also it's a timed release clause as well. It's only applicable, like with Eze, for a certain period. The notion is that West Ham might countenance business for below the Premier League release clause, which I think is £85 million. Tottenham want to sign a winger this summer, so there's a lot of logic to this, but it again doesn't mean it's going to advance or happen. But he definitely, Mohamed Kudus, is a player just to keep the proverbial eye over in this transfer window.
Just out of curiosity, what's the Saudi buyout clause? Is it higher or lower than the Premier League?
Our learned friends can check this out on The Athletic because we did break it. It's in excess of £100 million, I believe, or euros.
Right.
Europe is then lower, as is the Premier League.
Is that a common thing now that there might be like a regionality element to buyout clauses?
I'm sure it's more common than we know, but it's the first time I've actually knowingly come across it, certainly with a high-profile player, that it's staggered for different territories. So it's novel for sure.
Yeah.
So I think Tottenham would carry appeal to somebody like him, Champions League football, remaining in London, but there'll be other options as well. And I don't think this one is close to a conclusion just yet.
Yeah, cool.
I would like to ask a question about clauses.
Oh, yeah, go
if
on.
I may. How do agents and clubs find out about clauses in these contracts? Are they obvious? Are they listed somewhere? How do they find out?
There are some clauses that are confidential, and so a club that is looking into recruiting that player should not know about it and should not have a way of finding out about it. And they see rumours in the media and they speculate, is that true? That's the sort of innocent answer. And by the way, there are also clauses that stipulate that the agent is allowed to disclose it to potential buying clubs. And so that's, I guess, the skill of a negotiation when that contract is drawn up. But the majority of them, from my experience, are not meant to become public knowledge.
Presumably because it would be seen as like incentivizing an offer if it was known publicly.
Yeah, one of the most common things that I pick up on in transfer negotiations is let's get that player to stay for one more year, even though he's almost certain to leave in that 1 year.
Yeah.
Here's a bit more money to satisfy the fact that you never got a bigger contract. Do us one more year. We could really do with you. Here's the clause if you want to go at the end of it. and everyone wins, provided somebody comes in and triggers that in a year's time. Or they just say, good, that the clause is there, but really on goodwill, that's just a backstop. We'll negotiate in a year's time. More often than not now, one of the conversations around renewals is, will it be with the release clause? There's a lot of speculation around Erling Haaland and his original contract at Manchester City and whether it included a clause. I remember when I broke the story about his renewal that it was intimated that maybe whatever mechanisms existed before had been taken out. So clearly there was something there. And a more recent example that we'll look into in the coming times is there going to be a release clause for the exact scenario I just mentioned to you with Anton Semenyo. Speculation. Suddenly he signs a new contract. Is there a mechanism for him to get that move at a later stage? Gives him some money, gives Bournemouth some security. Job's a good one.
It was the quickfire round.
If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. The Athletic is home to some of the world's best sports journalists, including David Ornstein, Amy Lawrence and Rafa Honigstein. With the latest transfer news and insight on every Premier League story that matters, theathletic.com puts you inside football and you can try it free now for 30 days. See the link in the description.